Dorothy Louise Eady was born on January 13, 1902, in a middle-class London family. No one suspected then that this little girl would one day become one of the world's most remarkable reincarnation cases, and that her life would be determined by a 3,000-year-old love story. Dorothy was 3 years old when everything changed. In an unfortunate accident, she fell down the stairs and was so severely injured that the doctor pronounced her dead. But an hour later, when the family was preparing to arrange the funeral, Dorothy suddenly drew breath. From that moment on, she became a completely different person. The previously quiet and well-behaved little girl began saying strange things. She claimed this was not her home and that she wanted to return to her own house. She constantly spoke of an unknown place she called Amit and complained about why the people she loved were not there. Her parents initially thought the child's brain had been damaged by the accident, but Dorothy's behavior became increasingly strange. She began using words she had never heard and continuously drew buildings that she claimed to remember. These buildings were decorated with columns and hieroglyphs, about which an English little girl could have known nothing. The turning point came when Dorothy, at age 4, visited the British Museum with her father. When they entered the Egyptian section, the little girl completely transformed. She began running around the museum and started kissing the mummy coffins. "These are my people!" she cried, while embracing the sarcophagi with tears in her eyes. Dorothy showed behavior in the museum that astonished even the staff. She knew which artifact came from which dynasty and spoke of details about ancient Egypt that a child could not have known. When asked how she knew these things, she replied, "Because I was there too." Over the years, Dorothy continuously studied ancient Egypt, but not like a student, rather as if recalling memories. She read with devouring eagerness every book about Egyptology she could find, and learned to write and read hieroglyphs with incredible speed. But she didn't just learn about it. It was as if she recognized the things she read. At age 14, Dorothy met a man in a dream who called himself Pharaoh Seti I. This dream was so real that Dorothy still felt the man's presence after waking. The pharaoh told her that she had once been a priestess named Bentrashit in the temple of Abydos, and that they had been in a romantic relationship. This dream changed Dorothy's life. From then on, she dreamed every night about Seti and her ancient Egyptian life. She saw herself serving in the temple, learning sacred texts, and falling in love with the pharaoh. These dreams were so detailed that Dorothy could draw the temple's floor plan and knew the religious ceremonies that took place there. In her 20s, Dorothy met an Egyptian man, Imam Abdel Meguid, whom she married. This marriage gave her the opportunity to finally reach Egypt, but the real goal was always Abydos. When she finally arrived in Egypt in 1942, she felt as if she had returned home after a long journey. After arriving in Egypt, Dorothy's behavior became even stranger. She knew where to go in cities without ever having been there. She recognized people, places, and customs as if she had lived there since childhood. But the most shocking moment came when she first saw the Temple of Abydos. When Dorothy entered Seti I's temple in Abydos, she fell to her knees and began crying. She said she was finally home. Every stone, every wall of the temple was familiar to her. She knew where the hidden doors were, what each room was used for, and even where the parts that had since collapsed used to be. Archaeologists and Egyptologists initially received Dorothy's claims skeptically, but when she began telling details about the temple that were only discovered during the most thorough excavations, their attention was caught. Dorothy knew that in one part of the temple there was a garden where kings used to walk, even though this area had not yet been excavated. Dorothy began working for the Egyptian Archaeological Service and showed incredible knowledge of ancient Egyptian culture. She knew religious texts, understood ceremonies, and even knew what plants were used for healing. Her colleagues said it was as if an ancient Egyptian were living in the modern world. One of the most astonishing moments came when Dorothy helped archaeologists find a hidden room in the temple. She said she remembered there being a room where priestesses kept household altars. The archaeologists received this claim skeptically, but when they began digging, they found exactly the room Dorothy had described. Dorothy knew not only the temple's physical structure, but also the religious practices. She knew which gods were favored on which days, what sacrifices were offered, and how ceremonies were conducted. She even knew what fragrances and incense were used in different rituals. The local residents initially received Dorothy with suspicion, but over time they accepted her, even respected her. They said she truly knew their ancestors' customs and traditions. Dorothy knew things about local culture that could only be learned through knowledge passed down orally through generations. Dorothy claimed that she not only remembered her previous life, but also met Seti's spirit nightly. These encounters were so real to her that she had detailed conversations with him about ancient Egyptian history and religion. Through Seti's spirit, she gained access to information she could not have obtained elsewhere. If this story has interested you so far and you'd like to see more similar content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Now let's continue with Dorothy's fascinating story, which becomes increasingly bizarre. One of the most convincing pieces of evidence for Dorothy's claims was that she could make accurate predictions about archaeological excavations. She repeatedly predicted what would be found at a given location before excavation began. These predictions were so accurate that archaeologists began listening to her. Dorothy claimed that under the name Ben-Treshit, she came to the temple of Abydos at age 14, where she became a priestess of the goddess Isis. She described how she learned to write and read, how she mastered religious texts, and how she became an important member of the temple. She also spoke about what daily life in the temple was like. The love story with Pharaoh Seti began, according to Dorothy, when the king visited the temple. Ben-Treshit fell in love with the pharaoh, and he reciprocated her feelings. However, this presented a major problem because priestesses were required to live in celibacy. Discovery of their relationship would have been punishable by death. Dorothy described in detail how they secretly met with Seti, where they talked, and how they tried to hide their relationship. She also spoke about how Seti tried to convince her to leave the temple and become his wife. But Ben-Treshit didn't dare do it because she feared the consequences. The tragedy occurred when Ben-Treshit realized she was pregnant with Seti's child. She knew that if this was discovered, they would both die. According to Dorothy, Ben-Treshit decided to commit suicide to save Seti's life and preserve the temple's purity. This explained, according to Dorothy, why she remembered this life so vividly, because it remained unfinished. In her modern life, Dorothy also continued her relationship with Seti, whom she experienced as a spirit. According to her claims, she met with him every night, and these encounters were so real, as if Seti were physically present. In these meetings, they discussed ancient Egypt, religion, and Dorothy's current life. Archaeologists and Egyptologists were initially skeptical about Dorothy's claims, but over the years, they saw more and more evidence that her knowledge was truly extraordinary. Dr. Klaus Baer, an Egyptologist at the University of Chicago, said about Dorothy, "This woman knows ancient Egyptian religion better than anyone else I know." Dorothy knew not only the temple but the entire Abydos area. She knew where the ancient roads were, where the canals flowed, and where buildings that had since disappeared once stood. The local archaeological service often sought her advice when planning new excavations. One of the most astonishing cases occurred when Dorothy spoke of a place in the temple that no one else knew. She said there was a hidden room beneath the temple that priestesses used for meditation. The archaeologists initially didn't believe her, but when they began investigating, they found exactly the room Dorothy had described. Dorothy's knowledge extended not only to physical locations, but also to ancient Egyptian daily life. She knew what foods they ate, how they prepared them, what clothes they wore, and how they did housework. She even knew details of the ancient Egyptian language that only the greatest experts knew. The local people respected Dorothy, and many of them believed she was truly the reincarnation of an ancient Egyptian priestess. They called her Seti, which means Seti's mother, referring to her son Seti, whom she named after Pharaoh Seti. This name stuck, and she was known by it throughout Egypt. Dorothy claimed that not only Ben-Treshit's memories lived in her, but also memories of other ancient Egyptian lives. She spoke of having been a simple peasant, merchant, and even a slave in different lives. This explained, according to her, why she knew ancient Egyptian society so well at every level. Over the years, Dorothy gained increasing respect in the Egyptologist community. Her expertise was recognized, and she was often consulted on difficult translation questions. Her knowledge was so deep that many said of her that it was as if an ancient text had come to life. During her work, Dorothy made numerous discoveries that contributed to a better understanding of ancient Egyptian culture. She helped uncover details about religious practices that other sources had not preserved. Through her work, new insights were gained into how ancient Egyptians lived and thought. One of the most remarkable aspects of Dorothy's story was how accurately she knew ancient Egyptian medicine. She knew the medicinal plants and treatments that ancient Egyptians used. Even modern doctors acknowledged that many methods she described were indeed effective. Dorothy claimed that ancient Egyptian knowledge had not been lost, but was still accessible to those open to it. According to her, the human consciousness was capable of preserving information from one life to another, and these memories could resurface under special circumstances. The scientific community was divided about Dorothy's case. Some believed she was an extraordinarily gifted person who was able to learn and understand ancient Egyptian culture to a depth that was inaccessible to others. Others, however, believed that Dorothy was truly a reincarnated ancient Egyptian priestess. Dr. Ahmed Fakhri, an Egyptologist who worked with Dorothy for years, said about her, Seti's knowledge is as if she personally lived through what she talks about. She doesn't speak about ancient Egypt like someone who studied it, but like someone who lived there. Dorothy knew not only the ancient culture, but also modern Egyptian traditions that originated from ancient times. She knew which customs and beliefs went back to the time of the pharaohs and how they had changed over the centuries. This knowledge helped her understand the continuity of Egyptian culture. Over the years, Dorothy increasingly lived according to the ancient Egyptian way of life. In Abydos, she built herself a simple house near the temple, where she lived as she believed Ben-Treshit would have lived. She followed ancient Egyptian religious practices and ate foods that ancient Egyptians also consumed. In her house, Dorothy set up an altar to Seti, where she prayed and made offerings every day. She said this maintained her connection with her former lover, and that Seti's spirit truly visited her. These encounters were so real to her that she reported on them in detail. The local community accepted Dorothy, even respected her. Many of them believed she was truly in special contact with ancient spirits and often sought her advice on various problems. Dorothy was to them like a living connection to their past. Dorothy's case raises not only the possibility of reincarnation, but also questions about how deeply the human consciousness can preserve information. If Dorothy truly remembered her previous life, it would mean that consciousness could survive the death of the body and memories could be transferred from one life to another. Skeptics claim that Dorothy was an extraordinarily intelligent woman who was able to learn everything about ancient Egypt, and that the reincarnation experiences were just products of fantasy. However, it's difficult to explain how she knew details that even the greatest experts didn't know. Dorothy's story also shows what impact reincarnation memories can have on a person's life. Dorothy's entire life was built around her ancient Egyptian identity, and all her decisions were determined by this. This depth of identification rarely occurs in reincarnation cases. One of the most interesting aspects of Dorothy's story is how consistent she was in her claims. For decades, she told the same details without ever contradicting herself. This consistency is a strong argument that she truly remembered something. After Dorothy's death in 1981, objects and writings related to ancient Egyptian culture were found in her house. Among these were texts that she claimed Seti had dictated to her in dreams. These writings contained details about ancient Egypt that could not have been learned from other sources. Modern technology opens new possibilities for examining reincarnation cases. Unfortunately, these methods can no longer be applied to Dorothy's case, but her story provides a foundation for future research. Measuring brain activity and other neurological examinations could help understand what happens to people who remember previous lives. Dorothy Eady's case raises not only the possibility of reincarnation, but also questions about what hidden capabilities human consciousness might have. If consciousness is truly capable of preserving information from one life to another, it would revolutionize the fields of psychology and neurology. Researchers consider Dorothy's case one of the most convincing reincarnation stories ever documented. The accuracy of details, the depth of knowledge, and long-term consistency all argue that Dorothy truly had extraordinary experiences. Dr. Jeffrey Iverson, who wrote a book about Dorothy, said, Seti's case challenges everything we think about the nature of consciousness. If her story is true, then we need to rethink what it means to be human. Perhaps the most important message of Dorothy's story is that love can survive death. According to her claims, the love that Bentrashit felt for Seti survived death and found them again in the modern world. This thought can offer comfort to those who have lost loved ones. If you enjoyed Dorothy's fascinating story and would like to see more similar content, subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Share this video with those interested in spirituality and reincarnation. Write in the comments what you think about Dorothy's story. Do you believe she was truly Bentrashit's reincarnation, or do you remain skeptical? The study of Dorothy Eady's case shows what a complex and mysterious phenomenon human consciousness is. Regardless of whether we believe in reincarnation or not, Dorothy's story encourages us to think openly about the nature of consciousness and the deeper meaning of human existence.